Welcome to day 4 of the new Dana Foundation Career Network Neuroscience and Society virtual career fair. It's a pleasure to see everyone, to see some familiar faces. I announced on the first night that we were going to do something special for all of our frequent flyers, any students who showed up all 4 nights. We're going to check the records, we're going to see who you are, we're going to follow up next week. Thanks to you for being here. If you're new, welcome. We're so excited that you're here. My name is Francis Shen. I am a professor and I study neuroethics and neurolaw at Harvard in the Center for Bioethics at Harvard Medical School and Harvard Law School. I want to start by saying some thank yous, and then I'll introduce our first panelist and we'll dive in. First, thank you to the Dana Foundation, Ishan Dasgupta, and all of the leadership there for supporting this effort. They sort of took a risk on something new, and we really appreciate it. Thanks to all of our student RAs for making this possible, especially McKenna Law and the whole team. There are a lot of students on this call, and you should know that this entire event was really fueled by students. It's me and a pack of students, mostly undergraduates or recent graduates. So you can do this as well. Thanks to the Harvard Medical School Center for Bioethics for hosting this. Thanks to Simply Neuroscience, a global nonprofit organization expanding student involvement in neuroscience for co-sponsoring this event. And thanks to all of our presenters, both tonight and our previous nights, and all of our breakout room leaders. We have 10 tonight. We've had many in previous nights. Thanks to everyone. Just a few things to know before we get started in terms of how the night will work. We have an hour with our presenters tonight around neuroscience and public policy, neuroethics, and neurolaw. That's the first hour. And then in the second hour, you can stick around, and we have 10 awesome breakout sessions. I was looking at the list this afternoon. I'm like, we have the Justice League of neuroethics and neurolaw and neuroscience and public policy. And you can just bounce around in that second hour and meet these folks and learn about their centers and their programs and their recommendations and advice around careers in their fields. You can find a lot more information than we can cover tonight on our website. It's neuroxcareers.org. You can subscribe to our newsletter to keep up to date on new opportunities and events. And I think by the end of next week, we'll have posted all of the videos in case you want to check out some of the things we've been doing in previous nights around neurophilosophy or neurotheology, all sorts of other neat fields. Finally, just a plug, if you like this and you are at the postdoctoral level, we are hiring. We are hiring a full-time postdoc for the Career Network. Night in, day out, you can work on this kind of work if that excites you. We'd love to have you here. Okay, last thing, if you have questions, and I hope you will for our panelists, you can use the Q&A function and type those questions in during the first hour. Then, of course, in the second hour, there are breakout rooms, and you'll be able to unmute, throw in your video, and talk directly with our many excellent participants. We will start today. We're going to go in this order. We're going to hear first from Dr. Dukes, then from Dr. Mashabane, then from Attorney Kaplan, and then from Dr. Choi. So we'll go from neuroscience and public policy, neuroethics, neurolaw, and I will introduce each speaker sort of just as they begin to talk. So it's my great pleasure to first introduce Dr. Angeline Dukes. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Neuroscience at the University of Minnesota, a sort of old and current stomping grounds. We're so excited. Go Gophers. She's an addiction neuroscientist, and her research seeks to assess the long-term effects of adolescent nicotine and cannabinoid exposure. She's a first-generation college graduate, earned her bachelor's degree from historically Black college university, Fisk University, and then earned her doctoral degree from the University of California, Irvine. Relevant to tonight's conversation, she is the founder and current president of Black in Neuro, an international organization dedicated to supporting Black scholars in neuroscience-related fields worldwide. And in her role in the Department of Neuroscience at UMN, she both teaches neuroscience courses and also leads diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So really sort of the sparkling model of neuroscience in the real world, in public policy, mover and shaker, entrepreneur. Dr. Dukes, real pleasure to meet you and to have you here. Thank you so much. I'm going to spotlight you and turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And hopefully, we can have some really interesting conversations this evening. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Angeline Dukes. I really like to highlight the fact that I'm a first generation college graduate and a first generation American in general. And so, my mom is from Trinidad and my dad is from Haiti. And so, even going to college and going through that whole process was a long journey for me to try to navigate. And then going to graduate school, in addition to that, was something that was very unique and very challenging in a lot of different ways, in particular with the fact that I am a Black woman. And so there are not a huge prevalence of Black neuroscientists as seen in like individual departments. And as I was going through graduate school, I felt very isolated and alone in the department that I was in for graduate school. We didn't have any Black faculty, and there was one other Black graduate student in my program with me, and it was just me and her as we started out. And that was really hard and it was very isolating. And then, of course, when COVID hit, it made it a lot worse and it just kind of exacerbated like our isolation and our loneliness. And so through that, that's how really Black and Neuro got started. And I like to emphasize that, I was just a graduate student when all of that got started. It's been 3 years now and it's grown tremendously. I'm incredibly proud of the work we do. If you're unfamiliar with Black and Neuro, it's an international nonprofit organization that like builds community and really supports Black scholars who are interested in neuroscience. And so it's like any area of neuroscience related fields. It can be psychology, it can be neurology, it can be anything associated with that. But I was a student when we started it, and now we have a directory of over 1,000 Black scholars in neuroscience related fields that people can look to find mentors and to connect with and to invite to be speakers and panelists and all of these incredible things. And so I was incredibly proud of that work. Through a lot of that work is how I actually ended up in my current position. So as mentioned, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota, and my job is very unique. I like to tell people that it's made up because I did make it up. My position is not something that you typically see. And so half of my job is teaching undergraduate and graduate neuroscience courses, but the other half is devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so through that, I really get to spend my time ensuring that other students from historically marginalized backgrounds are supported and that they have what they need in order to succeed in graduate school. I also run a post-baccalaureate program. And so if you're unfamiliar with the post-bac program, all that means is after they've graduated college and maybe they're preparing to go to graduate school, and for my program specifically, we're looking for students who want to pursue a PhD in neuroscience, but we pay them to do research full time, and we help them throughout the whole graduate school application process of like trying to get their personal statement together and their CVs and all of that, and we just kind of walk them through that whole process. And so I really love being able to do this work. It brings me great joy. It's something that I'm super passionate about. When we're talking about like the intersection of neuroscience and public policy and also advocacy work, my biggest thing that I like to really emphasize to people is that there's no point in doing the research that we do if the public can't understand it. So if people can't understand what it is that we're doing, what the findings are from this work, there's a huge disconnect there. And so it's really important that even if you're not 100% in this realm, that you are able to communicate the work that's being done and why it's important. And so that's a lot of the things that I like to do across different levels. So everything from K through 12 to older adults to pretty much everybody. I want everyone to at least appreciate science, especially neuroscience, even if they don't fully understand it. And so that's a lot of the work that I do. I just want to wrap up with a little bit of advice for those who do want to pursue further education or are interested in doing, this intersection of like DEI work and neuroscience. My first recommendation is to figure out what it is you're passionate about and what brings you joy. When I started college, I was a pre-med major and I was planning to become a pediatrician, and that's what I was going to do with my life. But that was mostly because I'm a daughter of immigrants, and that's just like what you do is you go to medical school or you go to law school to make your parents proud of you. And I had never met anyone who had a PhD, in any type of field until I went to college. And so that really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I realized like, oh, I don't want to go to medical school for myself. I was doing it because other people wanted me to. But what I really love doing is I love teaching and I love mentoring. And so I'm really happy that I get to do that now. So please, figure out what it is that brings you joy, and don't just choose a career because someone else wants you to do it or because it sounds good. Let it be something that you really enjoy. And then once you decide on that, it's really important to find a good mentor who is currently doing the work that you think you want to do, because they can help guide you through that process. So I'm really looking forward to answering any questions that you all might have. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. And that does sound like an awesome position. It's really neat and great advice. We'll turn next to Dr. Olivia Machabane. Let me spotlight you, Dr. Machabane, and introduce you. Dr. Machabane is a researcher in the ethics of neuropsychiatric genomics and neuroethics, and currently is a visiting postdoctoral researcher in the Social and Behavioral Research branch under the National Human Genome Research Institute at the NIH, and also now a new faculty member and neuroethicist at Stellenbosch University's Department of Psychiatry in the South African Medical Research Consul Genomics of Brain Disorders Unit. She has played a really important role in the International Neuroethics Society. She's chair of the INS Student Postdoc Committee and sits on the INS Board of Directors as a representative of that committee and also member of the nominating committee. She's been really involved in a number of important cross-continent initiatives, including the African Consortium, the Human Heredity and Health in Africa, H3 Africa Consortium, where she chairs the Fellows Committee, as well as being active in the Ethics and Community Engagement Committee. It's already an extremely talented portfolio for somebody so young, and we look forward to hearing from you about your journey and your advice about others who might seek to do the same. Thank you, Dr. Machabane. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shane. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about my journey and to speak about neuroethics specifically. So my journey really started when I was very young. I was always fascinated by the brain, and specifically thinking about how it relates to mental health. And this was partly because of my own experiences as a child growing up, and thinking about how my parents navigated that, both through sort of a cultural lens and a biomedical lens. So I'm from the Amaxhosa cultural group in South Africa, and our cultural group has a lot of sort of cultural understandings of mental illness and how it manifests and some of the causes around that. So it's been very interesting for me to look at some of the scholarship that scientists have done within neuroethics, which is really a field that looks at the ethical, legal, social, and cultural implications, as well as some policy implications related to neuroscience and scientific technologies. So the field itself, it could be traced back, as most people would say, to the year 2002. It's relatively young, just like most of the neuroscience and society fields. And essentially, it's really trying to advance and think about and anticipate what are some of the neuroethical considerations of these technologies, and how we can sort of curb any kind of harms from being impacted for individuals in society. I think the first time I actually met Dr. Shen was actually in a webinar that was conducted by the International Neuroethics Society, and that was really looking at scientific oppression, biological reductionism, and the future of neurotechnology, and really reflecting on some of the harms that science has done in different societies and different communities, and thinking about how we can not we can prevent that within the field of neuroethics and neurotechnology. So I was quite fascinated and quite surprised and a little bit taken aback by realizing that there wasn't a lot of neuroethics work being done in the continent of Africa. And so I then started getting more involved in the International Neuroethics Society, where I've worked with fantastic people and learned a lot. As well as through the NIH, where I've attended sort of the NIH Brain Initiative meetings, where I've really gotten an opportunity to be involved at the heart of some of these neuroethics conversations. And so what I would encourage people to do is to attend conferences, is to reach out to scholars in neuroethics if it is a field that excites you. And to send those emails. Some people may not reply, but I can assure you that most people will actually be kind enough to reply and take some time to speak with you and possibly mentor you. So I've had fantastic mentors, and both from South Africa and here within the United States. And so I really would encourage you to find good mentors who you can speak to about your career plans and what you're interested in, and so that they can guide you and they can help you with your applications, writing your letters, for specific courses or for attending meetings or for applying for funding, where you find that some of these meetings, you actually require funding to attend them. So I'm in a role now at Stellenbosch University's Department of Psychiatry, where I'm a neuroethicist, and it's really a new role. I was telling Dr. Shen, it's created for me essentially, and I really am sort of tasked to try and advance the field of neuroethics within the space within South Africa and working with other scholars on the continent. We do have a lot of brilliant individuals who are working in sort of bioethics and other related fields who have collaborated with me in numerous occasions. And I'm thinking quite directly about cultural diversity and how that can be thought about within the space of neuroethics, as well as how we can enhance more, diversity and inclusion more broadly, because we know that there isn't a lot of representation from specific contexts, both from the African context, Latin American context, and other contexts that haven't been as well represented in the global discourses. So neuroethics really thinking about, how do we protect people's privacy when it comes to the neurotechnologies that are being developed? How do we ensure that people actually know what these technologies are assessing, what data it's collecting, and whether or not they consent to those rules for the technologies when they engage in them. Specifically in the commercial space, that's something that's very important, because people don't have sort of a one-on-one engagement with somebody who can really explain what these technologies mean. And I think that's something that's I'm quite interested in sort of thinking about and thinking about it from a local context. So I'm very excited to be here. If you have any questions, I encourage you to speak to some of the scholars who are very much experienced, who've probably been there since the beginning of this field, and they can share some advice, as well as some of the International Neuroethics Student Postdoc Committee members who will be in the breakout rooms, who are fantastic, and will be able to also speak from their various lenses, from law, from psychology, from bioethics, etc. So I think I will leave it there, and look forward to engaging. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Wonderful story. We will move now both in terms of presenters, but also in terms of subject matter. Tonight, in each of these nights, we've tried to put together fields that kind of sort of go together, but still it's very varied. It's one of the exciting things. We found 24 different fields across the 4 nights. And we'll move into neurolaw for the next 2 presentations. The intersection of neuroscience and law has both a long history and a more recent history. It's been a pleasure to be a part of the more recent history. And one of the things that's exciting about the field is that it has emerged in a way where you can be a practicing attorney utilizing brain science and practicing cases. It's not just philosophical, it's not just theoretical. Representing real clients, you can make a real career out of it, and not just a real career, but any career, but a really exciting career. And a shining example of that is attorney Michael Kaplan, who's with us tonight. I don't have time to tell you all of the amazing things that attorney Kaplan has done, so I'll just tell you a few. Attorney Michael Kaplan is a senior partner in the New York personal injury law firm DeCaro and Kaplan LLP. His practice focuses on personal injury and medical malpractice, with an emphasis on those representing individuals who have sustained a traumatic or acquired brain injury and other catastrophic injuries. He's not just an attorney, he's an educator as well. For over 10 years, he's been teaching the traumatic brain injury law class at the George Washington University Law School. He recently won an award for that work. He is one of the sort of founders nationally of teaching that in law school environment, and also is certified as a civil trial advocate by the National Board of Trial Advocacy. Multiple board certifications. He's held multiple leadership positions in sort of all of the major traumatic injury litigation groups, and has played a role in lawsuits that you've heard of, for instance, the NFL concussion lawsuit, amongst many others. We were talking before the break, and I'll say publicly what I said then. I'm really excited that you're here, because I think for many of our students, the challenge is, how do you transfer fun seminar papers about the brain and kind of an interest in law to actually practice? And how can you be an attorney? We're trained in law, not science. How do you handle all those complicated medical terms, all the rest? How might you get into this? So with all that, let me turn it over to you, Attorney Kaplan. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Professor Shen. I'm glad to be here tonight to speak to everybody about this exciting area. Neurolaw, or my area of specialization, representing brain injury survivors in negligence and malpractice actions, is a true intersection of law and medicine. And I could tell you nothing could be more exciting and fulfilling as an attorney. Why is that? Because brain injury is an invisible injury. It's an injury that the public at large, jurors, medical professionals, legal professionals, members of the judiciary, educators cannot see or readily understand. And why is that? It's because we are subtly trained to judge individuals and their disabilities by their physical characteristics. Do they require a wheelchair or walker? Do they look different? Do they act different? But a person who has sustained a traumatic brain injury may look and sound normal, yet they have a whole host of problems that will impact every aspect of their lives and the lives of their families and their friends, and these problems may last a lifetime. From the inside, a person with a brain injury may find it difficult to explain their injury and their deficits. From the outside, the public will find it difficult to understand the impact that the brain injury has on the individual's life. But these are the issues that I need to explain and deal with both inside and outside of the courtroom in dealing with trying to establish the injury, defining what a concussion is, whether or not my client has indeed sustained a concussion, areas of causation. What was the cause of their current problems? Was it the traumatic event, or was it something that happened in their past not related to the traumatic event? What type of damages did they sustain? Are they significant and serious damages? Is the person, the individual, exaggerating, malingering, making up some of what they claim they've experienced as a result of their injury? What damages did they sustain, and what will be the cost for both their care and their loss of earnings, not only yesterday and today, but for their lifetime? It's dealing with a whole host of different experts, be it physicians, neuropsychologists, professionals in the field of biomechanics, life care planning experts, economists, and the list goes on and on, because in the trial or representation of a person with a traumatic brain injury, I am compelled to deal with all of these areas. And oftentimes, I, as the attorney, have to field a whole host of other problems that this individual has that I really wasn't prepared to deal with. But not only am I the attorney, I am at times the social worker. I at times the navigator for that individual and their family, directing them to obtain the care that they need, establishing their injury for both purposes of government entitlements, for the purposes of obtaining necessary benefits in school systems, and also at times fielding questions from parents and spouses who come to me because they are no longer a parent, but now they are a caregiver to their child. A spouse who says, this is not what I signed up for. This is not the person I married. This individual is now a completely different person. Help me to deal with this. I still love this person, but I am overwhelmed and I don't know where to turn for help, because unfortunately in this area of neurolaw and the damages sustained by a brain injury survivor, there is a paucity of resources available, and unfortunately a paucity of long-term care that's available. So that I, as the attorney, have to fill many, many different roles. But I want the people listening tonight to understand that this field of neural law is not just about lawsuits on behalf of victims of personal injury. It can involve representing a victim of domestic violence and understanding why she's having difficulty caring for her children after having her head pushed on the mattress, or being flung against a wall, or being choked and deprived of essential oxygen. It may impact her ability to participate in any prosecutions or in matrimonial actions. She may be late to court. She may be misunderstood by the court or by the legal system. And you are there to protect her interests. In the military, it can involve obtaining essential benefits for service members who did not report their initial concussion while they were on the battlefield, or when they return to their base, because of the loyalty that they have felt to their fellow service members, and the knowledge that if they reported their injury, they would not be permitted to return to active duty. So when they're discharged and seek benefits for their injuries, there's absolutely no record that an injury took place. And yet, these individuals were injured, did sustain concussions, are in need of vital VA services and resources. And it's our job to figure out how to obtain those benefits for them. Or some may be coerced to take a less than honorable discharge for their aberrant behavior caused by a service-related brain injury. And after they've been coerced to take this less than honorable discharge, they discover they are no longer entitled to VA benefits. And now we have to go through a long process of trying to reverse this less than honorable discharge to obtain the necessary benefits that they are entitled to. Or parents may come to us seeking accommodations in the school system for their child under the IDEA following a sports-related concussion. Or coaches and trainers and school administrators may come to me for advice struggling to understand the many different school concussion protocols and how to abide by these protocols. Or representation of collegiate and professional athletes who will return to play prematurely and now suffer a lifetime of injuries, and those who are injured and now seek medical treatment and compensation for their medical care, and even continuation of their collegiate scholarships. Or disabled adults who desire to return to living in the community rather than a nursing home or a long-term care facility, and seek accommodations for their brain injury to live within the community under the Americans with Disability Act. Or individuals who are incarcerated because of their brain injury and resulting behavior and not obtaining needed care. Or those who are homeless because of their brain injury. Or those in need of a diversion court to provide alternatives to incarceration because of the brain injury they sustained. Parents or other caregivers may come to me or my colleagues because they desire to leave their brain-injured loved one with funds when they pass away, but they're afraid to do so knowing that their autistic child or perhaps a child with Down syndrome may lose their government benefits because of income eligibility tests. So attorneys in my field need to understand and be able to set up what is known as special needs trust in order to protect government benefits. And I could go on the different problems that develop as a result of a traumatic brain injury and the different needs that these individuals may have. But I can tell you one thing, and I want to leave everybody with this thought. I am blessed because every day I wake up and when I go to my office, I am happy and pleased with what I do. As a professional, I know I am providing needed help and assistance. And if you could wake up every morning and be happy with what you do and know that you are helping a family or an individual or someone's child, you too will be blessed. So I look forward to speaking with everybody in our breakout sessions to learn more about this area of specialty in the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Kaplan. we complement the civil side and all the many areas that were just discussed in two ways with our next presenter and final presenter on this panel, Dr. Octavio Choi. Dr. Choi will be able to speak both to neurolaw from the science and physician clinician perspective, and also on some of the criminal side cases that he works on. I'll introduce him now. Dr. Choi is trained both as an MD psychiatrist and a PhD neuroscientist, and has further training in forensic psychiatry, and is currently a clinical associate professor in the psychiatry department at Stanford University, where he was the founding director of the program in psychiatry and law. Just a footnote to kind of emphasize how new all of these fields are. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, neither of the positions of our first panelist existed. Dr. Attorney Kaplan was just starting. Dr. Choi's entire program didn't exist. And our stuff on neurolaw is just getting started. So these are really new fields, which means they're great opportunities to shape these fields. Just to finish Dr. Choi's introduction, he is a forensic psychiatrist, meaning he is in the courtroom regularly. He conducts forensic evaluations on behalf of both Stanford University and a number of private clients. And as an MD, he conducts clinical research in the interventional psychiatry group, primarily focused on patients with severe depression using advanced brain stimulation, such as transcranial magnetic stimulation. Tavi and I have co-taught a number of times, and always good to see you. Thanks for being here with us tonight. Turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Francis, for that lovely introduction. And it's great to be here. I prepared some slides, so my talk is going to be a little different from the previous talks, which were fantastic. But just give me a second to boot up my screen here. Great. Do you guys see?
Yeah, but Tavi, we see the version with your notes, which I'm sure we'd all love to see the inner workings, but it just means they're a little smaller, the slides.
Yeah. How do I? Oh gosh. So
now we see the regular version. You're good.
Nice. Okay. Fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you for that lovely intro, Francis. As Francis said, I'm based at Stanford, where I've established the forensic fellowship there, and also an interventional psychiatrist. So I'm going to talk about my work as a forensic neuropsychiatrist. And, I didn't know what that was before I became one. Like Francis said, a lot of us are just making up our fields as we go along. So I thought I'd spend some time explaining what a forensic neuropsychiatrist does. So most of you probably have heard the word forensic, watching crime shows and swabbing for DNA fingerprints and blood splatter analyses and solving crimes with DNA fingerprinting. And that is indeed the first definition of forensic, relating to the application of scientific methods to the investigation of crime. But there's a second definition that just basically means forensic means relating to courts of law. It comes from an old Latin word. And that's what I do. I interface with the legal system, and I give opinions regarding psychiatric and neurologic conditions. So I consider myself an educator to the courts. Courts often have questions involving mental health and neurologic conditions. For instance, should the person be found insane due to a mental illness or a neurologic condition? With my neuroscience background, I've developed a specialty in neurolaw, primarily focusing on cases that involve the brain and brain imaging. There's a lot of us, there's not a lot of forensic neuropsychiatrists, but there's a lot of people in the court that testify about the brain. So I just thought I'd spend a minute or two just who does what in the courts. So, you guys know about neurosurgeons, brain surgeons. They handle structural problems like removing tumors from the brain. You guys have probably heard of neurologists that handle things like strokes and seizures and migraine headaches. So these two fields have to do with like adjusting the hardware of the brain, right? And then there's psychiatrists that deal with conditions like depression, psychotic conditions, OCD. And so we kind of work more on the software side of the brain, right? In addition, there are neuropsychologists. They measure brain capacities like processing speed and your IQ and your memory capacities using pen and paper testing. There are neuroradiologists who, look at clinical images of the brain and make determinations about diagnoses. And there are neuroscientists who are often, in the courts talking about their latest research and often undeveloped research that courts are trying, that one side, in legal cases trying to introduce. So that's also very interesting. Now, for me, I'm really interested in the interface or the link between the hardware and the software. The amazing thing about the brain is that, the software that runs in the brain depends on the hardware, and also the software that runs in the brain modifies the hardware. So there's this two-way connection. And the doctors that kind of study the link between the software and the hardware are either neuropsychiatrists, if you come down the psychiatry lineage, or behavioral neurologists, if you come from the neurology lineage, and they kind of meet at this intersection between the hardware and the software. So I'm a neuropsychiatrist, and I'm really interested in brain behavior correlations. So, often, what I'm asked to do, for example, is to evaluate a brain damaged offender, someone who's exhibiting offensive behaviors, and they're picked up by the police. I look at the police report, and they often have a medical record that I review, and lots of different kinds of neuroimaging might be introduced as well. And, I take all this information and I'm trying to figure out, their capacities for moral reasoning, for rational thinking, and for impulse control, which are typically the different kinds of prongs for the insanity defense. And so in most of my cases, there's three streams of evidence. There's neuro evidence, like neuroimaging, there's neuropsych testing, and there are kind of reports of behaviors, like police reports. And when all these three streams converge, that's a really strong case. And those are really satisfying cases to work on. But they often don't converge, right? And so what to do in these kind of cases, I'll just kind of leave it an open question. That's where the secret sauce is. And it's what makes the field so interesting, when things don't conflict, and how do you resolve the conflicts? And as Francis said, forensic psychiatry is an applied field, right? It's taking all you know about the brain and mental health and illness, and actually trying to present that in a digestible form in court settings. And the opinions can really influence people's lives, right? So if you're a criminal defendant and you're being considered for insanity, the testimony that I give can often make the difference between the person going to a prison, highly punitive, condition, versus going to a psychiatric hospital if they're found insane. So, I feel like the work that forensic psychiatrists do is important and meaningful. There's a lot of neuroscience being introduced in the courts, and one of the reasons is because we're in this golden age of neuroscience. As Francis says, a lot of these fields are new. I mean, the Dana, the Dana Center that you've established is it's new, and the field of neurolaw is very new. But basically, there's just more and more neuroscience coming online. So the first wave was better and better ways to look at brain structure. The second wave was better and better ways to look at brain activity. And the third wave is better and better ways to intervene into the brain. So the first two waves sort of gave scientists eyes into the brain, and the third wave of intervention gave neuroscientists hands, so we can actually start to manipulate the brain. And of course, powering all these advances is the increase in computing power. So, the courts are really interested in whether brain structure analyses like MRIs can give us information about brain capacities, whether things like assessing brain activity can give us insight into mental states. And intervention, these different modalities like TMS, has really revolutionized the treatment of mental illness. The reason there's so much neurolaw is because mental states and capacities are really important for legal questions. So, we have the brain, and the activity of the brain gives rise to the mind. So, mental states that are, that the law cares about are things like whether you're lying. A lot of tort cases depend on how much pain you're in. So if we had an objective way to measure pain, that would be amazing. And to properly punish someone, you have to understand their level of intent. So these are all different kinds of mental states that the question is, now that we have ways to look at brain activity, to what extent can we know what someone is thinking based on their brain activity, right? So there's a whole rich literature on brain reading from mind reading from brain activity. I just want to give a shout out to Nita Farahani, a very prominent law professor who just wrote this book, The Battle for Your Brain, talking about the advances in brain reading from brain activity, mind reading from brain activity, and the neuroethical implications of privacy, for example. On the other hand, we have the brain, right? And the brain does its thing, and there are certain brain capacities that the law cares about, things like moral reasoning, rational thinking, impulse control, which are all different prongs of the insanity defense, right? And we care about that because your capacities determine how harshly we should punish you. So culpability or your blameworthiness is proportional to capacity. So we know, so if you have a mental illness, that should be taken into account, right? We might punish you quite differently. And if your mental illness is severe enough, we might find you insane, right? If you're young, if you're an adolescent, the legal system treats adolescents different from adults. But what exactly is adolescence? What's the line between adolescence and adulthood? And this is an active question that neuroscience has really been active in pushing forward. If you have a brain injury or a brain tumor, that of course can affect your brain capacities, and that should be taken into account in terms of culpability. And finally, as a thought exercise, what about psychopaths? So more and more psychopathy is being seen as a neurologic condition. And so should we take that into account in determining how to address psychopaths that offend? So I'm just going to wrap it up with saying, the way I got here was a very long and winding road. It's really important to be motivated by internal motivators. So things that, you can't make a career based on things that you think you should like or other people say you should like. You need to actually like what you like and be driven by that, because, to gain expertise in any field is a really hard task. So you need to be, the path needs to give you energy and activation in order to complete that path well. So really spend time on discerning, to the audience out there, discerning what internally motivates you. What do you truly like doing? And to try to base a career based on your actual interests. So, what I do at Stanford, I'm an interventional psychiatrist, I'm a neuropsychiatrist, I'm a forensic psychiatrist, and the commonality between all these three is the brain. So I'm a brain geek. I've been a brain geek for a long time. Started way back in high school. I said this is the first Oliver Sacks book I wrote. I wrote. I wish I could write it. I read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, about a guy who could see perfectly fine, except he couldn't recognize faces. And I just found that so interesting. These are people that have all their elementary neural pathways are fine for detecting lines and edges and colors, but they can't put it all together, right? And so we know this, it's really hard to recognize faces upside down, even though this information, all the information is there for you to discern what the face is. But our neural nets were trained on a big data set of not upside down faces, so it's hard to find. But once you turn the faces upside down, but suddenly your face recognition neurons can kick in and recognize these faces easily. So, I went on to Stanford as an undergraduate. I majored in this weird major called symbolic systems, which combines computer science, philosophy, and neuroscience. I went on to get an MD PhD at UC San Diego. After that, frankly, the lab wasn't really my thing. So I kind of wandered for a while. I eventually ended up in New Zealand, where I became incredibly homesick and started listening to NPR like 3 hours a day. And while I was doing that, lonely in New Zealand, they had this series called Inside the Criminal Brain, which I just found so interesting. One of the people featured on it was James Fallon. This is one of the last slides I have, Francis. I know I'm a little long. But James Fallon is a neuroscientist studying the neural base of psychopathy. And he found that, for instance, psychopaths have underactivity in this area of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which we now know is really important for moral reasoning. But he ended up scanning his own brain. And it turns out he has a brain, he has a psychopathic brain, but he is not a psychopathic criminal. He's a very high functioning and loved neuroscience researcher. So he gave a TED talk on this. You should all watch it. It's really interesting. But basically, brain behavior correlations are really complicated. Just because you have a brain that's set up a certain way does not your destiny. And you always have to take into account social and environmental factors in influencing what the actual behaviors of someone. I followed that up with a forensic psychiatry fellowship at University of Pennsylvania, because there are so many great neurolaw experts. Martha Farrer is in one of the breakout sessions afterwards. She's absolutely fantastic, so I highly recommend getting to know her better. And now I'm Stanford faculty. I love my job. I get to teach, I get to do forensic psychiatry, and I get to do interventional psychiatry, which is finally neuroscience is finally useful, is how I explain it. We can leverage our understanding of neuroscience to actually start to non-invasively modify brain connectivity. And for instance, TMS for depression is currently the most effective and the safest treatment for depression. So I'm going to end it for that. I'm happy to have people to reach out to me afterwards. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Tavi. Thanks to everyone. And thanks especially for moving through that quickly enough to allow us to get into our discussion. There are a lot of great questions. I want to remind everyone that you can add your question. I'll try to type some of these answers in, and then we'll just do as many as we can up until the top of the hour, about 10 to 12 minutes. Maybe one question that Dr. Machabane, you can take on from the start, but also maybe Dr. Dukes, you could talk about as well, is I'm going to read the question, then rephrase it slightly. So in neuroethics, our participant asked, how much of the field is, in quotes, hard science, and how much is discussion on ethics? I'm wondering if you could both speak about the interplay and even just that concept that there is, hard science over here and ethics over here, by implication, soft ethics. Could you both maybe talk about that? Maybe Dr. Machabani first, and then Dr. Dukes.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great question, and I think a lot of students may ask themselves that question. I think one of the things that I wanted to mention earlier on was around sort of this sort of difference in understanding neuroethics, where there's one branch where it's considered ethics of neuroscience, and then there's the neuroscience of ethics. And the ethics of neuroscience is more sort of applied ethics and looks at those questions around privacy, and can be sort of investigated with using more empirical methods. And that's the work that I focus on the most. And then there is the neuroscience of ethics, which is looking at questions around like free will, and can use a lot more sort of more philosophical lens. And so in terms of whether or not somebody needs to have hard science training to be a neuroethicist, I would say that people come from a range of diverse backgrounds. You've heard Dr. Duke speak about psychology, a psychiatry, MD. There's a lot of different backgrounds that you can come from, but you can also come from bioethics background or a social science background. And that's the background that I come from. And so I do a lot of, I do neuroethics courses and psychiatry courses because I'm not a psychiatrist. But it is possible to work in the field without having sort of a direct neuroscience degree. I will say that the field is very interdisciplinary. So the idea is that you will be working in general with neuroscientists, with neurologists, with neuropsychiatrists, and with them being at the table, by virtue of them being at the table, you can be able to sort of understand from their perspectives what are some of the neuroethical things that need to be considered related to the topic or the technology or the challenge that people have, the specific disorder that people have. So I hope that answers the question, and turn it over to Dr. Dukes. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you did a fantastic job answering that question. So I might just go a little bit broader, where it's not just ethics, but any other fields interrelated with neuroscience, right? Like this whole career fair was touching on all of these different areas of neuroscience in relation to all these areas of society. And I think it's such a beautiful thing because it is very interdisciplinary, right? Like the field of neuroscience is so broad, and it's wonderful for people to come in with different backgrounds. And so I guess I'm mostly speaking to the students when I say, like, it doesn't matter so much what your original background is. If you have an interest in any of these areas, you can absolutely learn, and you have a certain perspective that you bring to the table that's very unique and very helpful for all of these areas. There is so much we don't know when it comes to neuroscience, right? Like, we are constantly learning new things. And I think that if you have an interest in any of these, even remotely, you should continue to pursue that and like try to bring your own perspective to the table, because you never know, you could be the next one, given a TED Talk about these things.
Thank you. Both great responses. The next question is really a flip of that. If some version of that question was, how much neuroscience do you need to get into various fields? This is a question, Attorney Kaplan, for you, which boils down to sort of how much law do you need? So Nam asked, how can a person with extensive neuroscience experience be able to transition themselves if they seek to work in neurolaw? What prerequisites are there? Where can you get work experience in neurolaw coming from the science side of all this?
Well, from the law side, I like to first tell my students that you don't need to be a physician or a neurologist to be successful in my area of practice. In fact, I use the term KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Well, when we talk about this area in courtroom and in legal proceedings, because although we rely upon neuroscientists to assist us in the trial of a brain injury case, we have to recognize that the people that we are trying this case to, whether it be a judge or jurors or presenting facts in the school system to educators, we are not dealing with people who are well versed in the field of medicine. And we have to be very careful not to turn them off. So the challenge for a neuroscientist who wants to get involved in the field of law is to try to take their knowledge and simplify it in a way that a average individual can understand what it is that we're dealing with. That's difficult, not impossible, but it's essential to being a successful advocate for anybody in this area. And I'm sure when Dr. Choi testifies in the case, he understands that he's testifying to a jury, and he's not presenting to medical students or in grand rounds, and he has to understand that in explaining sometimes it's very complex areas and issues in the courtroom. So it is challenging, I'm sure, at times for Dr. Choi, but as I said, it's essential.
Thank you. A quick question for Dr. Choi also about sort of getting into these fields. The question is, Dr. Choi, have you met any forensic pathologists that also perform criminology research? Would you recommend doing an MD PhD program for this purpose? Could an MD be enough to do this kind of research? And I guess a broader version of that question is, what type of training do you need, or what are some of the alternative paths? You talked a little bit about that in your presentation, but maybe you can just say a couple of extra words, because each of those degrees takes a long time, let alone doing both of them.
Yeah, so I don't think you have to do both degrees. So the MD pathway has certain options, and the PhD pathway has other options. So if you do the MD pathway, as I did, I did medical school, then a psychiatry residency, then a forensic psychiatry fellowship, and then I started to practice. That is one pathway you can take. The forensic training really is important, I would say, because it really teaches you not so much about neuroscience, but just the way how courts operate, how to communicate effectively. And I totally, concur with what Michael was saying. I mean, to be an effective expert, you have to be an effective communicator. So one thing you should do is teach a lot, because teaching actually, forces you to kind of distill things and say things in a crisp, simple way over and over again. The PhD pathway that you can become a forensic psychologist or neuropsychologist by doing the PhD pathway, become a psychologist, and then there's various forensic pathways after that. And I'm sorry, I'm being very sketchy about that because it gets complicated, and I didn't go through that pathway, so I don't have that much expertise about it. So there's different forensic specialties. There's forensic pathology, as Francis mentioned. There's forensic neurologists. There are forensic psychiatrists. In general, there's more forensic psychiatrists than the other types of medical fields, because psychiatry really deals with mental states. And like I said in my presentation, the courts really care about mental states. And so becoming an expert on assessing mental states, there's a lot of business there. There's a lot of work there. Forensic pathologists are really important, for certain things like how did the person die, and what can we discern about their manner of death. But those are kind of more specialized cases. There's probably not quite as much activity there, although I can't speak for that directly. So hopefully that gets to it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to pick a couple of the questions that I think are most general, and then some of these questions I think could be handled well in the breakout sessions. This would be a question, I think, for both Dr. Dukes and Dr. Machabane, and I see Dr. Machabane maybe already answering part of it. What career options are there outside of academia in these fields? I'm going to add my 2 cents at the beginning, and I've said this the last couple of nights, which is that in neuroethics, you often have a job title that doesn't have neuroethics in it, but in fact, you are doing ethics work day in, day out. And I would especially call out neurotechnology development and, frankly, all neuroscience research. One of the things that bioethics as a lens does, it's reflective. It's like a mirror. It asks you, are the things that I'm doing consistent with the values that I hold? And that's something that every neuroscientist, every neurotech developer, every drug developer, hopefully is doing. So as my friend Karen Rommelfinger has said, I've seen her present, we're all neuroethicists in some ways. But I take the point of the question, which is, I love doing this stuff. I also need to pay rent, and there aren't very many faculty positions. So what could I do? I'm wondering if either of you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So thank you for that question. I think that's a brilliant question. And whilst I'll keep it very short because I haven't really explored other options outside of academia, because I'm really wanting to be in academia at the moment. But I do know that at the NIH where I am, we have, for instance, a neuroethics consultant, that's Dr. Saskia Hendricks, who is somebody who's a consultant in neuroethics and maybe could be reached out to and could share, what her role entails. But I know that also some of the, maybe some of the companies that are developing neurotechnologies may be in need of neuroethics support. And so, like we have sort of spoken about a little bit, it is also okay to think out of the box and to think how your skills and your interests can actually benefit a specific space, organization, institution, and reach out to them and share how you think your skills could benefit them. So they may not exist, but it's possible for that to be, initiated, created based on a need that is there. So I would definitely encourage that. I know that some of the really amazing scholars from the NIH, even in policy, in relation to policy, have been in neuroethics, and like Dr. Cara Ramos, who's also moved to the Dana Foundation, and that's also a space where we have a lot of neuroethicists. So there are definitely places outside of academia. I would just encourage you to think creatively and try to identify individuals you can reach out to ask some questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say something fairly similar, just in that, even though that might not be directly in the job title, right? That doesn't mean that that's not something you can bring in or even negotiate for that position. I think, like, as a starting point for if you're interested in doing this type of work, but, maybe don't know of the positions directly, would be to first, like, get experience with that, right? I think that that's really important for you to at least start off with being able to talk to someone as a mentor or, in whatever capacity, to understand like what type of work that they do in this space and how you can be involved in that. So whether that's doing research or trying to co-write a paper with them, or trying to, just get experience that shows that you're becoming an expert in this field, right? And then you can then use that to help negotiate in whatever position that you have, to have this as an important area. As I mentioned, my job is made up. And the reason for that is because this DEI work isn't something that's typically seen in assistant professor positions as like built into the contract, but it's something I'm really good at and I have a history of. And I knew that like I would be able to negotiate that into my position because I had been doing that work, because I have experience in that area. And so it's getting that experience first and then being able to incorporate it in whatever else you're also interested in.
Thank you. It's really valuable advice. So we are just essentially at the end of our time. I want to be cognizant because I know a couple of you may need to leave right at the hour. So what I'd like to do is just go through the panel one last time, just to ask if there are any particular resources. Now I'm going to, plug our website. We're trying to consolidate those. So anything you mentioned, we're going to put on our website. Be great. But places you go, conferences you think that people should be aware of, just anything at that level. Any closing remarks? And then I'd encourage everyone to stick around because we will have introductions from our breakout room leaders, and then we'll go into further just open discussion in all those breakout rooms. But maybe we can just go in the order of the panel. Oh, actually, let's go in reverse order. Let's mix it up. Crazy, huh? So that would be, if I do it right, Tavi first. Any last words? Then Attorney Kaplan. Then Dr. Machabani. Then Dr. Dukes.
I'd say I'm somewhat of a conference junkie. I find that's the most efficient, high-yield way to get lots of information into me in a very energizing way. So I'm always looking out for interesting conferences on AI or neuroscience. So that's so feed your love. It's kind of like what I would say. And conferences is the way I do it.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Attorney Kaplan?
Well, I would think as a general conference that would bring together both the law and the field of neuroscience, you should look into conferences sponsored by the North American Brain Injury Society, NABIS, and an International Brain Injury Society that hold joint conferences between attorneys and neuroscientists every year. And you could, it's a great conference for networking as well as for learning.
Thank you. Dr. Machabani.
So thank you. I would say that the International Neuroethics Society has a conference next year in April. It will be in Baltimore. So I would suggest that people consider that. Very reasonable rates for young and emerging scholars to attend that meeting. As the student postdoc committee, we will be there, most of us hopefully, and you can have a really fascinating and fantastic time getting to know neuroethics and getting to meet people who could potentially be future collaborators or even mentors. So that's the one that I would suggest. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Dr. Dukes, I can have the final word.
Yeah, so always, I think that the biggest one in neuroscience is like the Society for Neuroscience Conference. It's a great way to connect with people. It is massive and it can be overwhelming, but we'll be there as Black in Neuro this year doing a workshop on like how to survive graduate school. And so hopefully that'll be really fun. I also wanted to share that like through Black in Neuro, at the end of July every year, we have Black in Neuro Week, which is a virtual conference and it's free for everyone to attend. And we often have panels as well that discuss not just neuroscience broadly, like the research people do, but also racism within the field of neuroscience. We do a careers panel where we have people come and talk about different careers. And so I've linked both the website and the YouTube page that has recordings of all of this.
Wonderful. Well, this concludes the panel presentation right on time. Kudos to our panelists. Thank you for being here.